Chapter 1, The Office Queen. Grace Thompson adjusted the cuff of her tailored blazer as she stood in front of the mirror, her eyes critically assessing the reflection staring back at her. At 42, she had perfected the art of the professional image, confident, composed, and always in control. Her dark brown hair was pulled back into a sleek ponytail, and her makeup was meticulously applied, highlighting her sharp cheekbones and piercing green eyes. There was no room for error in her appearance, just as there was no room for error in her life. The morning sun streamed through the large windows of her corner office, casting a warm glow over the city below. The view was one of the perks of her position as the manager of a top marketing firm, an office high above the noise and chaos, where she could survey the world like a queen surveying her kingdom. It was a view that many envied, but for Grace, it was a reminder of the sacrifices she had made to get here. A knock on the door broke her reverie. Grace turned, her expression shifting from reflective to businesslike in an instant. "Come in," she called, her voice steady and authoritative. The door opened, and her assistant, Sarah, stepped in with a smile that bordered on nervous. "Good morning, Ms. Thompson. Your 9 a.m. meeting is set in the conference room. The team is gathering now." "Thank you, Sarah. I'll be there shortly," Grace replied, her tone brisk, but not unkind. As Sarah left, Grace allowed herself a brief sigh. Another day, another battle. But she was used to it by now, used to the long hours, the constant demands, the pressure to always be at the top of her game. As she walked to the conference room, the usual chorus of "Good morning, Ms. Thompson" followed her, each greeting tinged with a mix of respect and wariness. Grace knew her reputation. She was the boss who didn't tolerate mistakes, who pushed her team to the limits, but also the one who delivered results. It was a delicate balance, one that required constant vigilance. The conference room was already filled when Grace entered. Her team, young, eager, and slightly anxious, sat around the long table, laptops open, ready for the day's agenda. Grace took her seat at the head of the table, and the room fell silent, all eyes on her. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice commanding attention without effort. "Let's get started." The meeting proceeded as usual, updates on ongoing projects, discussions about upcoming deadlines, and the occasional probing question from Grace that made her team sit up a little straighter. But as the conversation flowed, Grace noticed a subtle shift in the room. New faces, new energy. It reminded her of her early days in the industry, when she had been just as eager, just as determined to prove herself. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. A tall, young man with tousled dark hair and an easy smile walked in, his presence instantly drawing the attention of the room. He was new, that much was clear, and there was something about his demeanor, confident but not cocky, relaxed but focused, that piqued Grace's interest. "Sorry to interrupt," he said smoothly, his voice warm and engaging. "I'm Simon Hayes, the new junior analyst. HR said I should introduce myself." Grace's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, she felt something unexpected, a flutter, a tiny crack in her professional facade. But she quickly composed herself, nodding in acknowledgement. "Welcome, Mr. Hayes. Please take a seat. We were just getting started." Simon smiled, a smile that was both charming and sincere, and took the empty seat at the table. As he settled in, Grace couldn't help but notice the way the room seemed to shift around him, the energy becoming more vibrant, more alive. There was something about him, something that unsettled her in a way she hadn't felt in years. The meeting continued, but Grace found her thoughts drifting back to Simon. He was young, 15 years younger than her, if she remembered his file correctly, but there was a maturity in his eyes, a steadiness that was unusual for someone his age. He was listening intently, occasionally jotting down notes, but every now and then, his gaze would flicker toward Grace, and when it did, she felt that strange flutter again. As the meeting wrapped up, Grace stood, ready to dismiss the team. "Thank you, everyone. Keep up the good work, and remember, excellence is our standard, nothing less." The team began to gather their things, but Simon lingered for a moment, his eyes catching hers once more. He walked over, holding out a hand. Ms. Thompson, I just wanted to say how excited I am to be working under your leadership. I've heard a lot about you, and I'm looking forward to learning from the best. Grace took his hand, and the moment their skin touched, she felt a jolt, an electric connection that sent a shiver down her spine. She quickly masked her reaction with a professional smile. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. I'm sure you'll find plenty of opportunities to grow here. Welcome to the team. Simon's smile widened, and for a brief second, Grace saw something in his eyes, something that made her heart skip a beat. But before she could dwell on it, he nodded and walked out of the room, leaving Grace standing there, her mind racing with thoughts she hadn't allowed herself to entertain in years. As she returned to her office, Grace tried to shake off the feeling, reminding herself that she was a professional, that she had worked too hard to let something, or someone, distract her. But deep down, she couldn't deny the spark that had been ignited by that brief encounter. She sat down at her desk, her eyes drifting to the window and the city beyond. For so long, she had focused on her career, on being the best at what she did. But now, for the first time in years, she felt something stir within her, a longing, a curiosity, a desire to explore the possibilities that live. And as she sat there, staring out at the world, Grace couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was room in her life for something more than work. Something unexpected. Something like Simon Hayes. But for now, she would keep that thought locked away, hidden beneath the layers of professionalism and control that had become her armor. After all, she was Grace Thompson, successful, powerful, untouchable. And that was the way it had to be. Or was it? With a sigh, Grace turned back to her computer, pushing aside the thoughts that threatened to distract her. There was work to be done, and she wasn't about to let a pair of warm brown eyes and a charming smile throw her off course. But deep down, she knew, something had shifted. And no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, that flutter in her chest was a reminder that maybe, just maybe, life had more in store for her than she had ever imagined. Click follow for the next chapters.